All right, guys, we got a good one for this video. Before we get started, as always, follow me over at Twitter. Eric D. July is the handle. That's at Eric D. July. You can also visit my website, ericdjuly.com, to get some more information about me, some of the services that I offer, as well as just getting up to date with my podcast, For Canon's Sake, which is, of course, live on all major digital platforms. And I thought about actually doing this video for that podcast or a podcast episode, but figure we'd just do a little solo video reiterating some points. I believe that you always got to update your resume. I've been one of the guys that's been leading the charge on this when it comes to YouTube and talking about what I have coined tokenizing of characters. And it is an insult. Let's call it what it is. It's an insult. It's lazy. It's dumb. A lot of other words that I can come up with, and we're really going to spend this video going through all of those reasons as to why that is the case, because some people just don't get it. So I got my notes here that I'm going to go through, and we'll discuss everything. Now, first, let's define it. I think that's important. No matter in whatever debate that you're having, no matter whatever discussion that you're having, you have to define it. And it's not even to focus on the semantics of it all, which that's sort of what we're doing. It's more so because I think people pin it on a definition that I might not use. And that's really the only thing that's important. The only thing that's important, if you're going to, let's say, be critical of something that I said, is going by the definition that I use. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you about how you may use it, though. Again, you can go on YouTube and search that term, and I'm positive my videos are going to be the ones that pop up because I'm one of the only ones that have been using it on this platform. Now, I define it as two different instances, right? A race swap, gender swap, sexuality swap, and so forth of a pre-established character. Now that can be, in the first instance, let's say a copy that's in the comic book. So Miles Morales, I would consider that a tokenized version of Spider-Man, per se. Spider-Woman, really the same thing. And Supergirl, She-Hulk as such. And I'll go in depth in that a little bit, but that's one way. Another crosses over into live action depictions. So you'll have the version that is being represented on screen that is tokenized, as in the character has been historically white, the character has been historically male, or so forth. And when it crossed over into live action, it was not that. Marvel, for example, in Captain Marvel, herself is a tokenized version of Marvel, but Marvel in the movie is played by a woman. I believe Ajax in the upcoming Eternals movie is played by Selma Hayek, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be an example of that. So keep those in mind. You're talking about race, sexuality, gender swaps of pre-established characters, be it in the comic book and going into live action, as well as film, TV, and such. Now, the reason why I consider this to be insulting, lazy, pathetic, and so forth is due to a combination of different things. And I think that's what's the most important about this is the context. It's not just one single thing that makes it, insulting, lazy, pathetic, and so forth. This is why I've said that tokenizing is not all characters, as an example, are bad. I have made the argument that the best handled tokenized character to ever exist in mainstream comics will be She-Hulk. Not all of them are objectively bad, though I would see it as an unfavorable thing to do, certainly in this day and age. But it's a scale, you know what I mean? Not all of them are bad, and some are just really, really bad, if that makes any sense. So consider that as we move on with the rest of this video and some of the other talking points that I'm going to discuss. Please keep that in mind, because that's very important in terms of the definition that I'm using. A lot of people use it synonymous to bad, and I would argue that it is an unfavorable act. However, it's a scale. Not all things are created equal. But first, let's talk about why it is that people feel the need to tokenize these characters. Main thing is they want to capture the success of notable and more popular characters, that branding. It takes less work to develop an original character. When you think about some of the characters that people know and love, the Batmans, the Supermans, the Spider-Mans, we are talking about decades upon decades of character development, live action films, animation. It's so much there in terms of branding that generations upon generations have grown up and loved on some of these characters. Now, that's not always the case. You do have characters that have become loved that were created in more recent decades and such. However, it's just easier to rebrand that. It's easier just to palette swap or gender swap or something of that nature, because the source material is there, so you don't have to do as much work. And then trying to get the audience to accept it, it's going to be a lot easier in terms of starting from scratch, because you're not starting from scratch. You are talking about, basically piggybacking off of what already exists and what already people recognize. And this is not an accident when they do this. A lot of creators will admit this. When they do it, when they go in creating, if you look at the history of Miles Morales, who isn't even that old of a character, barely a decade old, if that, but solely created, piggybacking off the Obama thing, and they wanted to create a half black Spider-Man. That's solely why he was created. The other reason is the what people don't want to discuss, and they probably won't ever admit, is that it's to appease those who obsess over race. So you have diversity, and it's not just, race, it's gender, sexuality as well. Diversity, representation, these other sort of buzz terms that people like to use. There's an entire stan Twitter. There's an entire stan Instagram. There's an entire stan, Facebook pages and such, in which people get a kick out of having these characters be race swapped, if that makes any sense. I've done videos on this and talking about how, I remember somebody posted this picture. It had like the Black Canary, which is the upcoming Black Canary, and Birds of Prey is black. I believe it's Jesse Smollett's sister. And then you also have, it was like Iris West from the Arrowverse as well. And they were like, posting this to make racists mad. And it's like, yeah, that's the place that racists, the Klansmen just go read comic books, right? That's exactly what they do. It's stupid. But they have these entire pages dedicated to foaming at the mouth and just glamorizing these people, right, that are race swapped characters. And they talk about how, I see myself, all the representation and such. And I'm going to go in depth on this concept here and why I explain why this is bad. But it's not an accident. I just mentioned that. And what I mean by that is there's no shortage of talent. And there's no shortage of like writers and creators that would have any problem creating new original characters. There's no shortage of them. And there's also no shortage of actors and actresses who, if they're humanoid characters that are clearly white, clearly black, clearly Asian, clearly whatever, there's no shortage of them. Definitely when you consider DC and Marvel, they're cash grabs. So they're itching to fill these roles. So this whole idea that they're the best person for the job is just complete nonsense. They go out of their way to cast these roles. They're like, all right, we want a black version of this character. And so they go cast it. It's just, we want a black version of this character in the comic book. So they make the black version of the character in the comic book. It has nothing to do with accidents. It's not accidents. They do this and they dedicate a lot of time, wish they dedicated that time to creating original characters, but this is what happens. So let's talk about why this is bad. And in order to exercise why this is bad, I have to get something that is going to prove my point. So hold on. All right. Remember, it's about context. It's about context. Believe it or not, when it comes to some of these characters that are female, that are black, that are Asian, that are of some group that participates in the gender or the race swap, both of these, and I'm going to move this out the way a little bit. Sorry, Batman Annual. believe it or not, there are official encyclopedias that are put out by DC and Marvel. I have both of them, the latest editions of them. Now, when I talk about there being mountains upon, and this is the DC one right here. Right? So when I talk about there being mountains upon mountains upon mountains of characters, right, that they could just literally pick and choose from, that are female, that are black, that are original, if they wanted to do that. This is why I am convinced that a lot of these people are not really fans, right? They may be guys that want to get into writing, want to get into creation, and I don't know how these guys get on these teams, who's hiring them, what the creative directors, the editors are doing, or what have you. Nonetheless, both of them have big encyclopedias. I mean, these are massive. You probably curl these for exercise. Marvel's is even bigger. Mountains upon mountains, man, of characters that they have that they could just pick and choose. This is Marvel's. Let's get a focus on that. And this is Marvel's. Okay? So it's not like these characters don't exist. Of course these characters exist. And if they didn't exist, they can always create them. Remember, context. It's not just about the race change. It's about the fact that they have this at their disposal. And if they wanted to bring some characters, let's say live, in terms of some live action, or they wanted to bring them in, whether it be movie, film, it doesn't matter, or they wanted to bring one back. Remember, comic book deaths aren't even really a thing. If they are dead, they wanted to bring them back. There's mountains upon mountains of evidence. DC, Marvel, you can hire me to be an advisor if you needed some help, or if you needed to, and this is the next point I wanted to make, just create a new one. You can just always create a new one. That's always an option. You can just say, okay, these characters aren't working for me. We want something fresh, new, create them. And that doesn't mean it's going to work. That doesn't mean the audience is going to respond to it, but you can do it. Create new ones. Create new characters. But this already exists. So if you're trying to bring people into the live action, there's mountains of characters that none of you guys created that are here. Why not use them? So, with that being said, now we're talking about, because things like this exist, we're talking about characters that are going shelved, untouched, underdeveloped, in order to be replaced and have their replacement, which is a tokenized character, be what is hyper-emphasized. Context. Big example of this when it comes to live action is Baron Mordo, who is in the Doctor Strange movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You think that, okay, instead of making him a black guy, because he's from Transylvania, or he's Transylvanian, yeah. But instead of making him a black guy, they easily could have brought in Brother Voodoo, who you guys can't see. I have a photo of him right above there. So if you've seen my streams and stuff, and even my other stand-up videos, you've seen him in the back. I think he's messing with like this Gambit doll, voodoo doll. Nonetheless, Brother Voodoo is a thing. Brother Voodoo exists. He's existed for decades. Even in the recent, you talk about terms of the connection that he can have with Doctor Strange. He's, to the role of Sorcerer Supreme. Obvious, right? Obvious. You didn't get Brother Voodoo. You didn't get an original black character. Instead, you got a tokenized Baron Mordo. That's all I'm saying, man. That's all I'm saying. You got a tokenized Mordo instead of getting what should have been Brother Voodoo. Original black character. Remember, context. I'm going to say that probably 99 times. Another is Valkyrie, who is going to turn out to be, I don't know if she's going to be a full-blown lesbian. I think she's going to be bisexual, which is the original. There's been multiple Valkyries, but Valkyrie in terms of Brunhilde that's not her. But they do have one that's as guardian that is of the, lesbian of bisexual nature. Her name's Angela. Didn't bring in Angela. They could have did that. Another one, perfect opportunity if they were so set on bringing in LGBT members or characters. I talked about this I don't know how many times. The whole Thanos, instead of putting in a Captain Marvel movie, which turned out to be completely useless in terms of Thanos's importance to the Marvel Cinematic Universe during this climactic period, instead of taking advantage of the fact that they brought in Thanos, so they could have brought in Titan, they could have brought in Eros, Mentor, all of that stuff, talking about his background, and because of that, they would have inevitably had to talk about the OG Captain Marvel. And because Drax the Destroyer is already there, and considering who raised Drax's daughter, Moondragon is bisexual. So they could have brought in Moondragon, and because of the Marvel connection, they could have brought in Phyla-Vell, who right now is in a relationship in the comic book with each other. So you got that, a lesbian couple, and Phyla-Vell and Moondragon, which could have been brought in. And instead of doing that, all right, let's just tokenize Valkyrie. It's stupid. It's like, who is in charge of giving these guys source material over at the Marvel Cinematic Universe? That was an obvious. You could have brought in a female, strong, very strong. Moondragon is strong as I don't know what. Could have brought in a very strong female character who is also bisexual. Instead of doing that, they gave you a tokenized version of Marvel, who is an utter goofball in the comics. Ever since she's not been Miss Marvel, she's been a goofball. But nonetheless, they dropped the ball, an opportunity. Even though Drax the Destroyer he's already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they could have brought that connection because of Thanos. Again, who was the first person to ever defeat the Thanos, Captain Marvel. They could have segued that into Phyla-Vell. But what do I know? Context. The next. It's an insult to the groups that they're trying to appease. And I talked about that that's what they're trying to do when they do this. This is quite often a lot of people that are part of these, definitely nowadays, when everybody's signaling, everybody wants to be get the retweets, and everybody wants to act like they're this beacon of hope and change, and they're influencing all of these people. These people often get in writer positions, screenwriter positions when it comes to live action, but also just when it comes to just characters in the books. A lot of these people are activists, and a lot of actors are activists as well. Of course, it's going to cross in all the way down. These people always want to utilize these characters that they did not create, in these narratives to be activists. But it's an insult to the people that they're trying to appease to, because what they're doing is saying that you're easily appeased. All they have to do is dangle in front of you recognizable brand. Hey, little black man. Here's Wallace West, a Black Flash. Never mind, they could create an original character, but here you go. Using that as an example, and you stand over the character. So you get a hand-me-down, pre-established. Everybody knows mountains of source material. Everybody knows this character has been historically white. This is what we know as the Flash is. I'm just using that as an example. Is historically white. And they dangle that in front of you, and they think you're too stupid to recognize that you're being insulted. In fact, they're thinking that it's going to have the opposite effect, because it does. It works. And that they're trying to appease you for the sake of activism, whatever. But again, instead of developing, let's say in the case of like black characters, instead of developing black characters, I've done videos for both Marvel and DC talking about underdeveloped black characters. And we'll do more in the future. In that they give you the off-brands instead of developing those original ones. They say, hey, you're not good enough. Here's the off-brand version of whatever knockoff. You get a knockoff version of the character. Oh, look, I see myself in the representation. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But this is the type of silliness that we're having to deal with. Also, and I think this is probably the most important out of this entire section, is that you got to take in mind how long some of these characters that are getting race changed or getting versions of these characters, how long they've been in development. I'm talking about years, and I'm talking about decades before I was even thought about being born. And it's not even just that you have to consider. You have to also consider the fact that there have been white characters. Those are the ones that tend to get race changed, but there are white characters that don't work out. Audience didn't respond to it. Whatever. That's gonna happen with the black characters too. It's gonna happen with the Asian characters too. That's gonna happen with the Latina and Latino characters too. Hispanic characters. It's gonna happen. That doesn't mean you stop trying or you say, oh well, we know what works. That we spent 60 years developing. Let's just give them a knockoff version. Like, come on, man. So they're telling you that they won't put time into developing original characters, black characters as an example. They won't take time to develop those. Instead, they'll just do the lazy thing and give you a knockoff. And you prove them right by accepting this nonsense. Now let's go through some of the silly rebuttals and the ones that I see the most often in my videos. And that first and foremost is the representation element. Now, a lot of people say representation is good, right? It's sort of what people, they don't do it for you. It's not for you, right? Anytime I'm critical of anything, it's not for you. It's for the little kids who see themselves, and now they feel inspired because they now see tokenized Spider-Man. Jesus Christ. They always bring up the kids. It seems like, and they do that in politics too, where if they want to shut up criticism, they say it's for the kids. Dogs are barking in the background, so if you hear them, you know the drilly. But that's a learned trait. When people hyperemphasize their race, sexuality, or gender, that's a learned trait. Definitely youngsters, when they do it, that's a learned trait. And I think it's irresponsible as grown adults and parents that you guys do that. But that's a learned trait. Talked about how if you driving down your neighborhood on the way to the store, I know in my neighborhood there's a little playground, and drive past it, going to the grocery store or something, and I see kids of all different races and both genders just having fun, sliding down the slide and stuff like that. That's because when they're at that young age, they don't give a crap about that. It isn't until through schooling, through their parents, that they learn that those are even concepts. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be acknowledged, or like people, different races, different genders, and definitely when it comes to male and females and how they interact with each other, that's something that you have to teach kids, that it's not the same. But in the same respects, in terms of them being able to relate to other individuals, that barrier doesn't exist when they're young at all. That doesn't exist until you put the barrier there, and it's almost artificial. Because if they didn't learn that, and that's just why you get areas that didn't really learn, not areas, but people that didn't really learn that, they have a really hard time understanding this concept, and that's why. It's because they're like, well, nobody really, when I was growing up, they didn't really teach me that there was something wrong there. But when they find out there's something wrong there, because it's so silly, right? It's so silly, like, oh man, I'm not gonna like this person. Oh, I can't relate to this person because they're a different skin tone than me. Like, what the what? It's crazy, right? And I talk about how all of these different characters that I grew up liking, right? My favorites growing up. My favorite character growing up, it's not my favorite character anymore. It's one of them, but not my favorite. My favorite character now is Batman. Because as I grew up, I gained a greater appreciation for this character. But my favorite growing up was Flash. Like Barry and Wally, but more so, Barry. But it was like, I was a very athletic kid growing up. I was fast in particular. And if you know me, I took that all the way to the Division I collegiate level. Current still school record holder at A&M Corpus Christi. And I loved Flash because I could relate to the fact that he was just really fast. And I was really fast. So I loved him as a kid growing up. Let these chumps tell it I wasn't supposed to like him, or I couldn't relate to him because he wasn't my color. And I couldn't see myself in Flash. Like, Flash is fast, I'm fast. It was that simple for me. Now, Batman, who was the complete opposite of me, rich, white, I've gained a greater appreciation for because of him being able to use his intellect to navigate and outpace his opponents, though he's outmanned, outgunned, That's that perseverance element that I've always appreciated out of him, and I love. It's not just the fact that he has money and can just buy all these gadgets or have them built, but it's not just that. It's just the fact that in all his tribulations and his trials and the things that he's had to experience, how the type of dynamic shift that he throws in things like the Justice League, because he's essentially powerless. I've appreciated that more as an adult. But let these fools tell it I can't like them. I should like Signal or Batwing because they're my race. And it's like, what is that? But really what this does is it perpetuates racism, sexism, and such. Because what you do is you rob people of their agency. You limit them to their race, their gender, their sexuality, when you say that they can only relate to another person because of that. So you're applying these sets of traits and attributes to them solely because of their identity. Some of which, when it comes to the race, as an example, that's nothing in their control. They were born like that. They don't think of it like that. But this is an idea, and this, if you learn nothing else from this video, I think this part is the most important in the terms of the entire video. That is something that's perpetuated by the educational and Hollywood elites. And it's to make them feel this sense of importance, right? They go around gallivanting, be in a movie, educate, and it's like, look at me, I'm black. And then they go among a lot of black kids and say, see, I did it, you can do it. It's like, oh, great, you're inspiring them. But the reason why you're inspiring them is you're telling them essentially that they can only do something if they see themselves in you. Who gave you that importance? Where's the parents? And it's not say that I'm against inspiration. I'm against people being inspired or aspiring to be great. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that is bull jive that is perpetuated by educational and Hollywood elites to make them feel important. You legitimize their position. But who made them that important? And I'm not going to give them that satisfaction and acting like they are that important, because as if my kids need to see them in order to feel inspired. Like, that's really crazy when you think about it and you break it down like that. But kids shouldn't need them to look at to feel important. You know what I mean? And again, if they are, that's something that, or feel like they can't achieve greatness. Like, why can't somebody look up to a black kid, look up to somebody that's Hispanic or Latino or Asian and see some sort of inspiration there? Like, that's something that, again, we continue to just perpetuate. It's not anything that is legitimate, because when you consider how people are able to navigate amongst different economic classes through many different upbringings and such, people move up and down economic classes all the time. And there's just individuals with certain interests and stuff. There's so many different ways you can relate to somebody that has absolutely nothing to do with their race. So why is it that I have to be limited to that in order to see some sort of greatness in somebody? That's something that's crazy. But again, it goes back to robbing people of their agency, because you limit them to their identity and you perpetuate racism, sexism, and such by suggesting that people can't relate to people unless they are of that particular race or gender or such. Now, another thing that you're going to hear people say watching videos like mine is that they'll say something like race isn't essential to the character in order to justify it. A lot of these that I'm going to go through here are justifications for the race changes. If that's the case, then what's the point of the race change in the first place, and why would you make a big deal out of it? Again, you can go back to all the creators nearly of all of these characters. It's like that are tokenized. It's, I did it to do that. Now, maybe in the live action side of things, they don't necessarily admit that. But if that's the case, these little Stan accounts and Stan Twitters and stuff, and these people that I feel so inspired. None of that would be a thing if race, if we're talking about things not being essential to the character. All of that doesn't need to exist then. But again, there's no shortage of actors and actresses that'll fill those roles. You know what I mean? So there's no point in changing it. Like, you have to go out of your way to do it. Definitely in America, there's so many actors and actresses that would knock out these roles, that'll do great jobs in filling some of these roles. Some are known, some are unknown virtually, but there's people that are willing to fill these roles that are of the particular race of the character. And another thing that's usually about the movies is it's a different universe. Even though there's different universe characters that exist that are tokenized, like you get black versions of characters, which you talk about Val-Zod, for example, that exists on a different Earth. Though the OG Superman did exist on this Earth. But a lot of that stuff comes from the movies, and it's normies they're talking about the movies. And it's generally said by people that don't know no better. That's why I call them Google normies, right? Like, it's like they want to have a reason, and I get it, to not feel out of the loop. So if they like a character that they've never been introduced to, that's the best non-argument that they can put forth, because it just derails everything. Any sort of conversation. It's basically them saying, well, it exists. It's not the comic. Forget it. It's not the comic. And it's like, okay, I want to like it. I have a reason to, and because of that, I now have a reason to like it. So it's just, I've never made an argument, and really, I don't know anybody that has made the argument that a live action depiction of a comic book character has to be exactly like the comic. The funny thing about that is, though, if they did make it exactly like the comic, like verbatim, you wouldn't know the difference anyway, because you know these people are only knowledgeable on things that they Googled, fandom sites and stuff like that they can figure out. They can read up on a lot of the people's background, a lot of these characters' background. But the point in bringing the character to life, I figure, should be to suggest to more so respect the source material, not to demonize it or do it wrong. It's to respect it. If that's the case, if you don't want to respect it, it's not a free fall. Don't use the character. There's no reason to do a weird, odd rendition of it, loose depiction of the character. You can at least respect the source material without it having to be exactly like it. This is actually arguably what made the Marvel Cinematic Universe grow in the way that it did, though it had its moments. All the main storylines that have existed up to these 10 years have all been referred to from the character origins. They've had slight changes, but they're virtually the same. What do you think the whole Ultron thing came from? The whole, even the whole Infinity, which is basically the Infinity Gauntlet arc in the comic books. Like, all of that stuff is looser depictions, but they're at least referencing the source material. But if you're not going to do that, what's the point of using the character? Create a different one. It's not a free for all, bro. It's not a free, just because it exists not in the comic book does not mean they can just do whatever and we're supposed to accept it. Like, no. What's the point of using a character if that's the case? Another one, it's canon. It's canon. And it's obviously said by the same people who will say it's just a different universe. So those are contradicting arguments. But any other time, it's a different universe. And it's usually said by those same Google normies who just learned about it. And this is like, for example, with Val-Zod. I got a lot of this stuff on my video that I talked about with Michael B. Jordan supposedly meeting up with Warner Bros. To do a version of Superman. And some people are like, well, it's not tokenizing, or it's canon. And it's like they Googled Black Superman. They found about Calvin, or they found out about Val-Zod, who just popped up, right? And Val-Zod wasn't an example. You can listen, go read interviews with Tom Taylor and all of those people that are involved in his creation. They specifically created him to be a black Superman. That's the only reason why he's there. To be black Superman. But, and that's funny, I read these comments, you can always tell people who literally are just Googling things and finding things about. He has been a virtually insignificant character. and rightfully so, but he's been an insignificant character. So not even one that should be skipping lines to be brought to live action. But either way, that doesn't mean that he's not a tokenized Superman, because that's exactly what he is. Black Superman. That's what he's created to be, and that's what he is. Black Superman. But he's virtually insignificant, and you consider New 52 was a mistake. I've already talked about this, but you consider, what happened out of the Earth, Earth 2 and all of that, and then going into Convergence, where they had to find him essentially a new home and stuff. Like, he's a virtually insignificant character, and he does, in terms of how he acts, it's funny. People are like, oh, I would love, he's a cool character. Like, he's done nothing, he acts nothing like you haven't already seen out of a Superman. As in Kal-El. He's just black. And it'd be one thing if they, there was an island, and this is the myth about, Krypton that a lot of people have, in that it's like everybody's the same, like there's no races that exist, and that's just objectively false, historically. And it would have been one thing if they would have said that he was from one of those islands that maybe produced people of different color or something like that, and he wasn't Superman. Like, he was just what you would consider maybe a black Kryptonian, but he wasn't Superman. They gave him a new name, different everything, right? I would have allowed it. I would have been like, okay, he's not Black Superman, but he's specifically Black Superman. And alas, this is my favorite one that people use, and it's not a rebuttal. It's not an argument at all. It's a fictional character. Anytime I express some sort of dissatisfaction with the direction that they go, it's a fictional character. Then what the hell are we obsessing for about racism, or representation and diversity for? It's just a fictional character. Why would we put that much importance in a fictional fake character, which all Hollywood actors do for the most part? There's little jobs just to be people that they aren't actually in real life. Some are, based on, fictional characters, some aren't. But if it's a fictional character, then what's the point? We putting that much importance that, these little kids gotta see these characters to feel inspired, and they're fake. That's because it's not an argument, and a lot of these arguments are just put out there to shut people up. Now look, I'm gonna conclude like this. This video is going a lot longer than what I anticipated. Tokenizing is needless, it's insulting, it's lazy. I understand why they do it. I understand from the monetary standpoint. I understand from the economic standpoint. I get it. That doesn't mean that this is a smart thing to do. That doesn't mean that when you consider it in context, and that's important, you can't just consider it in the fact of the race change, and especially with a lot of these characters, you got to take into consideration that we are talking about characters that are being put on a shelf, that are being replaced essentially, and not being developed for the sake of swapping another established character that everybody knows is not black, or is not of this gender, is not of this sexuality or so. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe that it can't be done. I don't believe this whole crap about people wouldn't support these characters. That's bogus. If they're any good, people would go out there and support characters, period. And there's already characters that exist, but if you wanted new original ones, you could do that without any sort of problem. You just choose not to. Just choose not to. I would love to be an advisor for DC or Marvel. Just because I know that their characters, I've talked about, I've done videos on, but there's plenty of characters I haven't, that I think would respond well to an audience if brought to a large screen. Arguably work better in screen than they have in the comics. But people are so obsessed for whatever reason with seeing themselves or seeing different versions of the same character that already exists, which is why I think it's such an insult that you get these weirdos that get in these position of power and are in control of these narratives and are writing for DC and writing for Marvel, who are able to just sort of change stuff willy-nilly. And it's like people do this crap and it's like, well, they're obsessed with having different versions of the same character, right? Because it's not going to stop at black Superman. It's like, I want gay Superman. I want all of these different versions of Superman. Instead of like, dude, we know who Superman is. Let Superman be Superman. You create another character. And if he hits, he hits. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But you're talking about a character that is so recognizable and has been put through the grinder for decades upon decades. And instead of advocating that people spend that much time developing other characters, you're talking about them just being lazy and race swapping him. And then, yeah, slay, queen. Slay. Because you got a hand-me-down version of a classically white character. Get out of my face.